divorce is one of the most interesting legal institutions of Roman law. Let us have a look at divorce in Roman law during the earliest period of Rome's existence, that is archaic period, then in pre-classical and early classical law. Now, divorce must have been known in Rome pretty early, because our sources tell us that it was already Romulus who introduced first regulations in that matter. The problem, of course, is the credibility of sources. This one comes from Plutarch's Life of Romulus, which of course was written much later than the events described in the text, which means that the credibility of the text is pretty low. But what has to be said is that probably already in the earliest period of Roman history, divorce was a known institution, and it must have been regulated somehow, either in statutory law, that is in Romulus's law, or at least in customary law. Romulus, according to Plutarch, made certain laws, one of which is severe, namely that which does not permit a wife to divorce her husband, but gives him power to divorce her for they used drugs or magic on account of children, or for counterfeiting the keys, or for adultery. The law ordered that if he should divorce her for any other cause, part of his estate should go to the wife and part should be dedicated to Ciceros. So basically Romulus is said to have introduced some reasons, legal reasons of unilateral divorce, called repudium in Latin, and to have introduced penalties for divorce obtained for any other reason. What were these reasons? This is a very interesting question, but the problem is that the text here, Plutarch's text, is corrupt, and we can have doubts. The one certain thing is definitely adultery, which of course is quite understandable. The other one has something to do with poisoning, and it is possible that this cause of divorce was abortion or generally poisoning. If it was abortion, it must have been not because of the abortion itself, but abortion countering the order, the will of the husband. And the third reason has something to do with the keys. Now, the possible way of interpretation of the text is that the wife could have been punished with divorce for having obtained some keys, and these were possibly keys to the wine cellar. So actually the thing forbidden to women was drinking wine, which is also backed by some other sources, quite a lot of sources actually. Romulus himself is supposed to have regulated also this matter. So basically we have three reasons: poisoning or abortion, obtaining the keys for the wine cellar, and adultery. If the husband divorced his wife for any other reason, or which we know from other sources, without having consulted his relatives or friends, which was supposed to give some evidence for the event, part of his estate was given to the wife and part was sacrificed to the goddess Ceres. Now, these early regulations, of course, were later used, but how were they used? What we actually know is that after the founding of the Republic, at first, family matters such as divorce were left to the family. But with time, it was the magistrates, and in this case the censors, who obtained, I don't know if it's the right word, but jurisdiction for such matters. What does it mean? It means that if someone divorced his wife, contrary to the regulation attributed to Romulus, so without giving a valid reason for the divorce, he was punished by the censors. How? With the censorial nota. Now, nota censoria was a type of a punishment that first of all led to ignominy, and it was a pretty severe kind of punishment for the Romans, who were very sensible in that matter, and to degradation, social degradation. What does it mean? A senator could be expelled from the Senate, a knight could be expelled from the centuries of the Equites, and any other citizen could be degraded by, for example, moving him from the rural to a urban tribe, which affected his political rights. How do we know about this? So there is a very important case concerning a divorce that probably happened somewhere around the year 230 BC, and it was a divorce of a man called Spurius Carvilius Ruga. This divorce was described in various sources, both Greek and Roman, and it was almost univocally called the first Roman divorce. It can't have been the first one, if we already know that there were some regulations concerning divorce as early as in Romulus's time, so this is absolutely unbelievable that, that the first divorce happened so late. But what was special about it? One of the authors who described Carvilius's divorce was Aulus Gellius. In his Attic Nights we find a nice passage concerning this case. Gellius says, "It is on record that for nearly 500 years after the founding of Rome there were no lawsuits and no warranties in connection with a wife's dowry in the city of Rome or in Latium, since of course nothing of that kind was called for, inasmuch as no marriages were annulled during that period." Servius Sulpicius too, in the book which he compiled on dowries, wrote that security for the wife's dower seemed to have become necessary for the first time when Spurius Carvilius, who was surnamed Ruga, a man of rank, put away his wife because, owing to some physical defect, no children were born from her. And that this happened in the 523rd year after the founding of the city, in the consulship of Marcus Atilius and Publius Valerius. And it is reported that this Carvilius dearly loved the wife whom he divorced, and held her in strong affection because of her character, but that above his devotion and his love he set his regard for the oath which the censors had compelled him to take, that he would marry a wife for the purpose of begetting children. Now, in order to understand this text, we have to read it very carefully and extract various pieces of information. So first let us look at the problem of the censors and the oath taken by Spurius Carvilius. The censors were magistrates responsible for compiling the lists of all the Roman citizens, and the whole process was called precisely the census. It was done every 5 years, and each Roman citizen had to present himself before the censors and make a declaration of his family and of his possessions. Now, during this declaration, as the citizen was asked various questions, and one of them must have been, have you married your wife for the purpose of begetting children? And the answer in this case must have been yes. So these questions were asked in a form of an oath made to Jupiter. So it was sacrally very important and binding, and that is why Carvilius decided that this was a valid reason for divorcing a wife who seemed sterile. Of course, we cannot say who was the party who couldn't have children, Spurius himself or his wife, but in this case he gave such a reason. Now, what else did the censors have to do with this case? So basically, in Romulus's law, it was written that a reason had to be given for the divorce. And as I said, some friends or family, some witnesses had to be asked in order to witness the legal action. Now, in this case, Carvilius did ask his friends, so this prerequisite was met. But the problem was that the reason he gave for his divorce was not one of those enumerated by Romulus or enumerated in the archaic law. Now, the censors were faced with quite a serious problem. Now, they were also magistrates responsible for persuading people to marry and to have children. It was one of their most important tasks. Now, in this case, they had to decide between two actually bad decisions. The first one was to let the divorce stay unpunished, and in this case they would say it is legal to divorce a wife without giving any of the reasons enumerated in customary law, or they could punish Carvilius Ruga and by this say that it was not important to have children, to marry for the purpose of begetting children. So both situations were tricky, and that is why the censors also had a problem. It can be deduced from the sources that possibly one of the censors wanted to punish Carvilius, but the other imposed his intercessio, his veto, and that is why Carvilius stayed unpunished. Although in the social life, he was. It was not a clear case. The people were a bit skeptical about this. Still, Carvilius's divorce was a very important event, because afterwards the first thing that happened was that it was much easier to divorce one's wife for any reason. And of course there was also a second very important factor. Before Carvilius's divorce, it was quite difficult for a divorced wife, for a wife whose marriage ended in any way actually, to get back her dowry, because it was only the goodwill of the husband to give it back. From Carvilius's divorce on, some legal measures enabling the wife to get her dowry back were introduced, so this was a very good factor. Now, some regulations concerning divorce were introduced also in the 12 tables. Now, as you know, the 12 tables were compiled in the middle of the 5th century BC, and it was the customary law written down actually. This law has not been preserved, we do not know it literally, but we have got various sources that we can use in order to restore it. And the regulation concerning divorce was probably placed in the 4th table, and we know about it from various sources, the most important of which is one of Ciceros' speeches, one of his Philippics actually, that is one of his speeches against Antony. In the second Philippic, Cicero is describing very vividly Antony's affair with an actress, and he is describing this affair as if it was marriage. Right? It can't have been married because Antony at the time was married with another woman. It was just an affair, but Cicero, in order to mock Antony, in order to make people laugh of him, described it as if it was marriage, and then he put a very nice fragment into one of his speeches. Antony desired that mistress of his to take possession of whatever belonged to her according to the laws of the 12 tables. He has taken his keys from her and turned her out of doors. So Cicero used a regulation of the 12 tables in order to mock Antony's affair with the actress. How? This fragment of the 12 tables, as I said, concerned divorce. We can deduce from the text that the regulation included a formula of divorce, which was probably take your things with you, res tuas tibi habeto, and it probably also included a prerequisite of giving the wife some keys, of taking some keys from the wife. What kind of keys? During the marriage ceremony, the wife was given the keys to the house where she was supposed to start living with her new husband, and in case of divorce, this ceremony was reversed and the wife was deprived of those same keys. So basically two things, a formula and taking the keys away. Now Cicero, in this fragment of his speech, tries to mock Antony, tries to say that he used such solemn words that were to be found in the 12 tables in order to get rid of a mistress, of an actress, so not of a wife. And then he finishes, "What a well-tried citizen! Of what proved virtue is he? The most honorable passage in whose life is the one when he divorced himself from this actress." Right, so quite a nice figure of speech, quite a nice piece of rhetoric. The formula "res tuas tibi habet," or take your things away, is then to be found in various sources, also in legal sources, one of which is the Digest. A fragment from the 24th book of the Digest contains one of Gaius's passages on the provincial edict, where the jurist says the word divorce is derived either from diversity of opinion or because those who dissolve their marriage go different ways. In cases of repudiation, that is to say, in renunciation of marriage, the following words are employed: tuas res tibi habeto, get yourself your things, or tuas res tibi agito, look after your things. Right, so the formula of the 12 tables was used later on in different cases of repudium, of unilateral divorce. We can also find other pieces of evidence concerning this formula, and one of the most interesting ones can be found in one of Plautus's comedies, in this case in Amphitro. This comedy is a mythological one. Amphitro is the husband of Alcmena, and he goes away to war. Alcmena bids him goodbye, but then he suddenly returns, and she starts living with him as if with the husband. The problem, however, is that this is not her husband. It is Jupiter disguised as her husband. And of course, then the real Amphitro comes back, and he starts thinking that his wife is committing adultery. She's very surprised. She doesn't know what is happening because he keeps asking her questions she doesn't understand. And finally, she's so tired with the situation, she doesn't understand that she wants him to divorce her. And in the text of the comedy, she says, "Fare you well, keep your own property to yourself, return me mine." In Latin, "Valeas tibi habeas res tuas, reddas meas." Now, various scholars tried to interpret this scene, stating that Alcmena here divorces her husband. She uses the solemn formula from the 12 tables in order to repudiate him. The problem is that in this period it was absolutely impossible from the legal point of view. It was only the husband who could unilaterally divorce his wife, and not the other way round. So what is actually happening here is that the exhausted wife, who can't stand the situation anymore, decides to do things for her husband. So she says, "Okay, you don't want to say it. I'll say it for you, but I'll say it so that it sounds just as if you said it." So she puts those words into her husband's mouth in order that it looks legally, in order that it looks as if he said those words, right? It must have been quite funny for the audience of Plautus's play, I imagine. The formula of divorce, according to Plautus, was one of the most feared things by women. We've got quite a lot of examples. For example, in the Cassina, one woman says, "Silly creature, you always take care and be on guard against this expression from your husband." What expression? "Woman, out of doors with you." Right? So another version of the formula of the 12 tables. There are also quite a lot of literary texts where the authors play with divorce, where they play both with the legal institution and the formula used in the 12 tables. So, for example, Catullus, exhausted with his affair with Lesbia, says to his friends in one of his poems, "Furius and Aurelius, companions of Catullus, announce to my girl a few nasty words. Let her live and let her flourish with her adulterers, whom having embraced 300 of them at the same time she owns and keeps them, truly loving none of them." By these words he actually announces divorce, not with his wife, again with his mistress, but using clue words connected with divorce. In Catullus's times it must have already been possible to divorce someone by a letter, which happens in this poem. Now, divorce became one of the more and more used legal institutions. It became a social normality, so that Seneca, in his own benefit, says, "Is any woman ashamed of being divorced now that some noble ladies reckon the years of their lives not by the number of the consuls, but by that of their husbands, now that they leave their homes in order to marry others and marry only in order to be divorced," Seneca says. So divorces became more and more common, but there were still some examples of people who stayed married for quite a long time, and one of the most beautiful and moving cases of such a marriage is the marriage described in the so-called laudatio Turiae. So in a funeral inscription composed for one Turia by her husband. The husband says, "Marriages as long as ours are rare. Marriages that are ended by death and not broken by divorce. For we were fortunate enough to see our marriage last without disharmony for fully 40 years. I wish that our long union had come to its final end through something that had befallen me instead of you. It would have been more just if I, as the older partner, had to yield to fate through such an event." So here the husband says, "I am the older one, I should have gone first, not you." But still, it is a very moving and a very beautiful example of a There are quite a lot of texts preserved from antiquity telling us about divorce. You can find different examples. But what is important is to remember that divorce was, just as marriage, not a formal legal institution. It was informal. But it was regulated, especially so that there was evidence for it. Why? Because, as you remember, if a child was born not long after the end of marriage, up to the 300th day, the child was considered to have been born to the previous husband of the woman. He could become the heir of the estate, and of course the son of the husband, of the ex-husband. So from the legal point of view, it was very important to be able to establish a precise date of divorce. In case of death, of course, it was much easier, but in case of divorce you had to have some evidence, and of course witnesses who could give a testimony that the traditional formula of divorce was uttered were really important. There are, of course, quite a lot of other legal problems connected to the institution of divorce, but for today this is all. Thank you very much.